3, 2, 1, go. Here I will introduce why the algae species of dinoflagellates and their habitat, specific in times of the Anthropocene or capitalocene, as my approach is one that identifies the Anthropocene as a somewhat arrogant view from a multi-species and meta perspective. They have a relevance and an entanglement to our time as humans. As Latour and Haraway suggest, we might never have been modern, and with an algae perspective on time, the single cells that have been some of the first living organisms on the planet, this has another angle to consider. At the same time, these species have qualities like energy efficiency and production our children cannot even dream of installing in their futures, even if our time has shown visions of the future accelerated to speed collapse into light time. Especially as we have an entangled and situated knowledge and world-making cohabitation in front of us, I suggest an algae perspective as an imperative to imagine human, animal, and human matter relationship in a non-linear and in a non-hierarchical way, with paying attention to our dependency on the multi-layered and multi-bodied inhabitants of Gaia, and in these days with a specific focus on its oceans as well. Facing the political challenges of climate change, the algae perspective and the algae species are a special interesting companion and a dangerous one to immerse with. We have not yet imagined the coming problems and growing inequality in geopolitics. Massive ones will be through climate refugees and migrations across species. The ecocide and the social and economic abyss we can analyze as implanted in our present already, and that will play out between parts of the world that are affected by very uneven. Which lives and which times matter and which ones will go to ecocide? Only to mention a few: sea level rising, glacier disappearing, coastal hazards and disappearances of coastal parts and islands completely, with the rise of deserts and drought areas in other areas of the earth that will render them inhabitable. The effects of and through political implications of climate change are symptoms of structural violence. The subjugation of women and the earth is one and the same. The time-honored enslavement of the feminine now climaxes in the virulent decimation of the bio and geosphere. Our propensity for warfare, violence, and hierarchy now ushers us along the path to ecocide. What kind of alliances can we mobilize in art, science, technology, and activism? My recent work and installations investigate the dinoflagellates and their bioluminescence as indicators for the health of coastal waters with toxic potential. Increased algae reproduction rates in the shape of blooms caused by warming waters are known as red tides. The algae block light and partly also produce chemicals that act as neurotoxins in other organisms feeding on them, such as the shellfish, causing serious damage in fish, birds, humans upon ingestion. These organic bodies that light up when touched or moved are reminiscent of the technological touchscreens surrounding us in our everyday life. The computer-generated imagery of enlarged individual algae takes audiences up close to these organisms, transforming scale and temporality and blurring the borders between nature and culture. Fossils that are found in the beginning of this year suggest that the currents might have been some of the earliest signs of life on this planet. The melting ice shelves of the Antarctic release bacteria and algae species that have been inactive for a large amount of time and now, with unknown to us potential, become activated on their timeline. However, in alliance with traditional knowledge of the coastal fishing communities, insight into the medicinal properties of algae for treating skin infections, which have been known to locals since centuries, can be granted. Much of my work places the skin, our outer boundaries with which we touch the world surrounding us, and luminescent screen technologies, our interfaces to digital realities, in metaphorical proximity. This proximity is a reality, as all articulation of all matter as made up of energy, waves expressed by indigenous relationality, as well as the dinoflagellate's glow, fits with a classically Occidental scientific definition of wave diffraction. So even if time might be a human concept, the conflation and whirling of it in epistemology and ontology in relation to these species is vibrant and not algorithmically. Little Bear, founding director of Harvard University's Native American Studies program, proposes a collaboration between indigenous and Western sciences. In this spirit, my research in sculptural work suggests the conspiracy of Western technological and indigenous situated knowledge, for example with regards to climate change or monitoring algae bloom and re-establishing communities across species. The entanglements of bodies and information is in overlapping analog and virtual worlds. My research delves into interspecies solidarity and points to our vibrant entanglement with other bodies as having the other in one's skin and time. In the quest for collaborative survival, responsibility understood as capacity to respond to others goes beyond human relationships and time, not least since what we define as human itself constantly changes. In the words of anthropologist Anna Löwenhaupt-Singh, we can't rely on the status quo, everything is in flux, including our ability to survive. Thinking through precarity changes social analysis. A precarious world is a world without teleology. Indeterminacy, the unplanned nature of time, is frightening. But thinking through precarity makes it evident that indeterminacy also makes life possible. The only reason all this sounds odd to us is that most of us were raised on dreams of modernization and progress. The problem is that progress stopped making sense. It's in this dilemma that new tools for noticing seem so important. We might be able to learn some from the algae and the fungi. So let's start with the struggle for earthly survival and its entanglement with the algae times. Algae in general fluctuate between an essential source of nutrition and endangering other life as toxic plague. They reproduce by mitotic cell division and enter mutually beneficial symbiotic relationships with other organisms. Their ambiguity makes them interesting to research that seeks to shift from pursuing epistemological certainty to recognizing ambiguity, fluidity, and change. Science and technology researcher Donna Haraway and feminist scholar and theoretical physicist Karen Barra's analysis of waves similarly look at oceanic phenomena to underpin their research. Both use diffraction, a phenomena observed in the way waves behave and combine when they overlap, as a metaphor to understand the world beyond insistence on unequivocal certainty. Unlike particles, waves can be superimposed, occupying the same position at any moment in time. Rather than reflecting a given thing or idea displaced elsewhere, waves, according to Barra, are not really entities, but disturbances in a medium or interference patterns in a field, and can incite a crucial rethinking of much of Western epistemology and ontology in relation to time and being. Marine scientists have warned that the future may bring more harmful algae blooms that threaten wildlife and the economy, and called for changes in research priorities to better forecast these long-term trends. Evidence shows that the destructive blooms called red tides in the past, but more properly harmful algae blooms, are increasing in frequency and severity. It's a growing concern among scientists that climate change may exacerbate. The combined effects of increasing temperature and atmospheric CO2 are affecting ocean surfaces, temperatures, nutrients, light, and ocean water acidity, all of which affect marine ecosystems immediately and with long-term and still not even imaginable effects spreading. These factors influence not just the intensity of algal blooms, but also their composition. The question is whether climate change will enable harmful species to outcompete other phytoplankton. And the problem in addition to that is that there's not enough knowledge about neither the current nor the future phytoplankton community structure. Recent discoveries have shown that ties from the algae to us via the food chain, how around and inside of us through the tissue of the shellfish, for example, the algae are and will be connected in an entanglement of otherness and through the tissues, skins, porousness and fluids, very physically manifold and possibly being intoxicated. The multi-species encounter is, as Haraway has intimated, a particularly important domain for cultivating an ethical practice. In it, we are most clearly confronted with what she calls significant otherness. In these encounters, we are confronted by an otherness that is radically other, without, I would add, that otherness being incommensurable or incognizable, neither in time nor in location. Many of these selves who are not ourselves are also not human. That is, they are not symbolic creatures or metaphors in their physical reality. They force us to find new ways to listen and paying attention. They force us to think beyond our world in ways that can help us imagine and realize more just and better worlds. As an artist working with light, the bioluminescence has been interesting to me as a phenomena in its relation to art, science, and technology, because it involves and influences precarity and highly complex ecosystems in its healthy variation and in the glowing bays of the Caribbean, where the phenomena of bioluminescent dinoflagellates is an ancient and not only seasonal but all-year phenomena, an aqua viva that looks like out of a science fiction movie. It shows a high degree of sensitivity, an alarm system, in relation to a broader ecological system, a community and communication intra and interspecies. Its observation and research shows that the glow functions as a burglar alarm. It warns with its light the predator, which in consequence will be found and eaten by the second predator. It is a living touchscreen, but an effective and an immersive, all-body emotional experience with as many communities testify healing and spiritual powers, which are in fact, from a modern science perspective, advanced in two ways. A make-your-own energy ability, the glow, is produced through a chemical reaction based on proteins called luciferase and used in neurobiology, neuroscience and neuroplasticity. And a living touchscreen, prototype in the way it functions. The agitated water, let's say a swimming fish or a human, triggers the dinoflagellate cell to flash by the imported mechanical stress. Any mechanical stress of sufficient magnitude, such as the forces in waves, surge, or by swimming animals, including us, triggers the luminescence and clusters the cells in a glow, making it look like magic and otherworldly, other at the same time, while actually being based on an ability that lies far ahead of humans, which have to torture Gaia and exploit the planet for sources of energy based on fossil extraction. To call this a wavy timeline of the algae and a science fictionality is based on an interaction of science and systems of knowledge, the indigenous included, and technology in all its varieties, from biohacking, where bioluminescence is a fantastic tool, to using toxic dinoflagellates for fighting cancer. The ecology and interspecies communication system and agency as a broader political, ethical field in the capitalocene is an imperative for alliances and solidarities. This thus is based on taking bioluminescence as an example of a field work and context where the natural world and timeliness and the natural community is subjective and constituted by the way we look at it with microscopes, satellites, and collective histories, narration, or we swim in it. In general, it's a call for recognizing the interconnectedness and networking of the human and the non-human, and the material as well as the immaterial of complete otherness from these single cells organized in clusters and many ways of reproduction and time management. They can actually cyst for some time and then reproduce either photosynthetic or in a sexual way to the spiritual powers ascribed to them by the ancient communities against the colonial oppression. Its core In its core, these special realities that we're dealing with are relational ones, and you can only understand them in terms of the complex networks that make them what they are. So any kind of relatum, whether we're talking about a social fact or a cultural meaning, or even an actor-in-actor network theory, is the product of the relationships that make it. This is a scaffold to understand multi-species interaction based on, for example, forms of interspecies relations and communications. Pietro Ventura is a biologist and fisherman, and he described to me the dinoflagellates writing text messages as he explained the political struggle of the Caribbean island that he faces, where the glowing bay is a key asset in that struggle of depth, colonialism, development, and green capitalism. The biosphere as a feedback system that holds many impacts, but this system belongs in turn to other geological, atmospheric, chemical systems that have their own dynamics, not always negative feedback, but also positive feedback and geometric acceleration. So again, how are we going to create an ethical practice in this time of ours in which futures of human and non-human kinds are increasingly entangled and interdependent in their mutual uncertainty, timeliness, and precarious forms of life? A life form that is politics, it emphasizes the process of being in the world and is committed to the idea that there are forms of representation that are non-language-like. In projects like biohacking or researching the rights of communities to start a lawsuit for claiming ecological justice, as it means social justice, it's a political dimension and awareness of the beyond the human ecology as an entanglement of colonial power systems and precarious forms of life, as a social reality that has a certain way implanted for the future. How we interact among species and within a larger than us ecology in the future. It's in large an interface that the entanglement not only with language but incorporate and openly engaging different forms of knowledge and levels of experience and futurability. Rethinking, observing, drawing the future for the relationship between humans and non-human in a cosmic sense and in one that is not transparent, so other that it might be toxic and entangled with every breath we take is the task. There are only mixed communities, hybrid animals, plants, microorganisms, minerals, chemical, geological, atmospheric, astronomical bodies, human artifacts, science systems and languages, human people, ideas, concepts, emotions interact on the same level of agency, while responding to autonomous and irreducible rules together. This is an expanded concept of production in excess of the capitalist law of value and fundamentally a cohabitation. An equally non-hierarchical media and immersion. An interface, a living touchscreen translation or mini ecosystem is what I'm dreaming of. Nature cultures embedded where consciously or only physically we are immersed. We need models to combine cultural critique and the uncovering of material realities and agencies. Maybe science fiction in installation or written form is one of the tools to pay attention.